In northern Thailand, something's going seriously wrong in the longan orchards. Prices for this fruit have absolutely tanked, hitting historic lows and pushing farmers right to the edge. So to figure out what's going on, we're going to break down this really intense parliamentary debate. You've got a member of parliament on one side saying the government's to blame, and a minister on the other saying, hey, this was just an unavoidable act of nature. Okay, to really get this, you have to look at the numbers, and honestly, they're brutal. According to the government's own data, it costs a farmer 15.24 baht to grow 1 single kilogram of longan. But what are they getting? For their absolute best, top-of-the-line grade A fruit, just 5 baht. And it gets worse from there. Grade A is 2.50 baht, and grade B, just half a baht. No matter how you slice it, they're losing a ton of money on every single piece of fruit they sell. So how on earth did it get this bad? Well, that brings us to the first side of this whole argument. Member of Parliament Futita Chayanan, she argues this was no surprise. She claims this disaster was totally predictable, and she's pointing the finger directly at the government for, in her words, failing to act. And she comes with receipts. She lays out this whole timeline, arguing that way back in April, her party was publicly warning everyone that a massive bumper crop was on its way and the government had to get ready. Then, by early July, just like they predicted, prices started to fall. On July 20th, things hit a breaking point. The selling price for the best longan officially dropped below what it cost to even grow it. A day later, a couple of government ministers show up for a visit, meet with farmers, promise action, but then 17 days go by and prices hit rock bottom. The farmers felt like no real help ever showed up. And this is where her argument gets really specific. She points to this huge disconnect between what was said and what was done. The government announced this big plan for new collection points to buy fruit from farmers. But then she shows evidence that one of the businesses on that official list came out and said, hey, nobody ever called us. We had no idea we were part of this. It just paints this picture of solutions that looked good on paper but didn't actually exist in the real world. Now, this is where the MP's argument takes a really interesting and, frankly, kind of puzzling turn. You'd think a price crash this bad has to be because of demand, right? Like the main customers just stopped buying. Well, the data shows the exact opposite. Citing figures from officials in Beijing, the MP points out that China, which is by far Thailand's biggest customer, actually bought more longan this year. A lot more. A massive 20% increase compared to last year. And this leads her to the killer question that she puts directly to the minister. If your number one customer is buying way more of your product, not less, how can the prices back home be the lowest they've ever been? To her, this is proof. The problem isn't a lack of buyers, it has to be a complete and total failure of how the supply chain is being managed at home. Okay, so let's flip the script and look at the government's response, because they're telling a completely different story. The Deputy Minister of Commerce, he pushes back, and he pushes back hard. He argues this isn't about negligence. This is about being hit with an overwhelming force of nature. His entire argument basically boils down to one single massive fact. He says the weather was just too good. No floods, no big storms. And because of that, you had this incredible harvest. In the northern region alone, production shot up by 12%. That flooded the market with over 100,000 tons of extra fruit that nobody was prepared for. From his point of view, this wasn't a failure to plan. It was a sudden supply shock, an act of God that just overwhelms the whole system. And this right here is where the debate gets just plain messy. The two sides can't even agree on the most basic fact. What is the price of longan right now? The MP is adamant that farmers are getting a disastrous 5 baht a kilo for their best stuff. The minister flatly denies it. He says no, on this very same day, the real price is double that. It's between 10 and 11 baht. The minister doesn't just disagree, he basically calls her out. He suggests she's out of touch, stuck in meetings in Bangkok, and then he throws down a challenge. He says, hey, after this is over, let's go outside right now and call my sources together because we need to talk about what's actually happening. It's this moment of high drama where it's less about policy and more about whose reality is the real one. So to counter this charge of doing nothing, the minister lays out all the steps the government has taken. He argues they've been on this from the start, trying to find new markets for the fruit in places like India and Dubai. They launch campaigns to get Thai people to eat more longan, And, he says, they added over 300 new local buying points to try and soak up all that extra fruit.
But here's the crazy part. For all their disagreements, all the finger-pointing and conflicting numbers, both the MP's argument and the minister's defense ultimately lead to the exact same critical failure point in the whole system.
It all comes down to something called the bottleneck. See, longan is super seasonal, which means the entire harvest comes in all at once. All of this fresh fruit has to get to drying facilities to be processed so it can be exported. But those facilities can only handle so much at a time, and it takes them about 3 days for just one batch. So the fruit is arriving way, way faster than it can possibly be processed, creating this massive logistical traffic jam. The MP used this really powerful metaphor. She said, imagine an 8-lane highway packed with trucks full of fruit, and they're all trying to squeeze into a tiny 2-lane tunnel. That tunnel is the processing plants. And here's the kicker. Unlike cars, which can just wait in traffic, fresh longan starts to rot. That makes farmers absolutely desperate to sell at any price they can get before their entire crop becomes worthless.
And this brings us right back to the heart of the disagreement. Both sides agree the bottleneck is the problem, but they see its cause completely differently. For the MP, that bottleneck is a clear sign of the government's bad planning and promises that fell through. But for the minister, it was the unavoidable result of a freak harvest, a surplus so huge that no system, no matter how perfect, could have handled it.
So in the end, you're left with one crisis and 2 totally different stories trying to explain it. Was it a failure of government, where clear warnings were ignored and the help that was promised was just for show? Or was it a force of nature, where an incredible, unexpected bounty actually became a curse that just overwhelmed everyone in charge? This whole debate really forces us to ask a much bigger question, one that goes way beyond these long-gone fields in Thailand. As our climate gets more and more volatile, we're probably going to see more of these extremes, from terrible droughts to massive surpluses. So who's responsible when a harvest is too good? And is this bitter harvest just a one-off disaster? Or is it a warning sign of what's coming for farmers everywhere in our increasingly unpredictable world?